Excerpts from the Dharma collection and special practice record with inserted personal notes by Chinul, the Shramana from Jogye Mountain in Haedong. 1. Chinul's preface. I, Moguja, the oxherder, said, Hetze Shenhui was an esteemed master of intellectual understanding, although he was not the direct heir to Zhaoxi, the sixth patriarch Hui Neng. His awakening and understanding were lofty and brilliant, and his discernment clear. Because Master Zongmi inherited his teachings, Zongmi explained them extensively in this Dharma collection and special practice record so that they could be clearly comprehended. Now, for the sake of those who can awaken to the mind through the aid of the teachings, Kyo, Jiao, I have abbreviated the text's prolix verbiage and extracted its essentials so that it can serve as a vademecum for contemplative practice. I have observed that people today who are cultivating their minds do not depend on the seminal points of the written words, but straightway assume that the path is found in the successive transmission of the esoteric intent of the Soen school. They then sit around dozing with their minds in a haze, their labors all in vain, or else they lose their presence of mind in agitation and confusion during their contemplative practice. For these reasons, one should follow words and teachings that were expounded in accordance with reality in order to determine what is primary and what subsidiary in regard to awakening and cultivation. Once you mirror your own mind, you then will be engaged in contemplative reflection, guanzhou, at all times, without wasting any of your efforts. Furthermore, the reason why the entries in this record were arranged with the schools of Shenshu, the northern school, and the others at the beginning, was because the text progressed from the shallow toward the profound, clearly elucidating each of their strengths and shortcomings. Here, I instead have brought the extracts on the Hetze school to the front, primarily so that people who are engaged in meditative practice will be able to awaken first to the fact that, whether deluded or awakened, their own minds are numinous, aware, and never dark, and their natures are unchanging. Subsequently, when the other schools are reviewed in succession, it will be obvious that their teachings are also deeply imbued with excellent expedience in regard to the soteriological aspect of person. If, at the beginning, you do not realize the source, viz., the numinous awareness of the Hetze school, you will be lured by the traces of the words used in the teachings of those other schools and fallaciously assume that some should be accepted and others rejected. How, then, will it be possible for you to develop an all-encompassing perspective and take refuge in your own minds? Furthermore, because I fear that meditators who are not yet able to forget the passions and keep their minds empty and bright might become bogged down in theoretical interpretations, at the end of my exposition I will briefly quote some statements by genuine masters in our tradition who followed the shortcut approach of Kanhwa Soen, Kyongjol Mun, Jingjie Men. My primary purpose there will be to remove the maladies of their knowledge and vision, jnana darshana, so that they can find the living road that leads to salvation. Nowadays, those who propagate Soen and the teachings are preoccupied solely with learned understanding based on the letter of the scriptures, so they will never be able to immerse themselves in transcending the world through meditation. Although the dissemination of the Buddha Dharma may vary with the passage of time, nevertheless, in the mind everyone uses every day, which is clear and capable of awareness, the nature of the afflictions, klesha, is void, shunya, and the sublime functioning is autonomous. This is simply the way things are. So what does it matter if the times change? The patriarch Ashvaghosha said, "The word Dharma means the mind of sentient beings." How could it be that he was deceiving people? If you just keep your faith firm, wholeheartedly devote yourself to contemplative reflection, and thereby accumulate pristine actions, karman, then even though you may not achieve an acute awakening in this lifetime, you will not have lost the right cause for the achievement of Buddhahood. When we think about it, for beginningless kalpas we have been submerged in birth and death, and have endured immeasurable suffering. Now we have been fortunate enough to receive a human body. We have been fortunate enough to have encountered the Buddha Dharma and to be free of worldly entanglements. But if we allow ourselves to backslide or to indulge in indolence, kausidya, and if we do not cultivate our meditative practice but spend our days idly, then following that moment when our lives have come to an end and we have fallen into baleful rebirth destinies, durgati, viz., as animals, hungry ghosts, or denizens of the hells, even though we might wish to listen to a phrase of the Buddha Dharma and would be willing to reflect on it with right mindfulness, how would it be possible? Consequently, I always admonish you, my resident friends on the path, to engage in meditative practice as much as you are able, and to vow to sustain the life force of the Buddhas and patriarchs. I hope that all of you accomplished people will together attest to this. 2. Excerpts from the Dharma collection and special practice record, the perspectives of the 4 Chan, Soen schools. The record states, the crux of the Soen approach involves looking inward, nejo. It cannot be narrated by the writing brush or expressed through words. Although words may not apply, we can still force the use of them, but where the brush's description cannot reach, it is indeed hard to put down the words. I write now only because there is no other alternative. I hope that you will reflect on these words in your hearts and will not become bogged down in the letters. The Hetze School's basic premise. The basic premise of the Hetze School is as follows. All dharmas are like a dream. This is what all the saints have taught. Consequently, deluded thoughts are originally quiescent, and the sense spheres are originally void. This void and quiescent mind, its numinous awareness, is never dark. In fact, this void and quiescent mind is the pure mind that was previously transmitted by Bodhidharma. Whether deluded or awakened, the mind is fundamentally self-aware. It does not come into existence through dependence on conditions. It does not arise with sense objects as its cause. When deluded, it is subject to the afflictions, but this awareness is actually not those afflictions. When awakened, it can manifest magic and miracles, but this awareness is actually not that magic or those miracles. Even so, this one-word awareness is the source of all wonders. Because of delusion concerning this awareness, the mark of self arises, and by assuming that there is I and mine, liking and disliking inevitably appear. According to these feelings of liking and disliking, one performs wholesome and unwholesome actions, and as retribution for these actions one receives a body in one of the 6 rebirth destinies, gati. Hence, generation after generation, life after life, the cycling through samsara continues interminably. If we happen to receive the instructions of a spiritual mentor, Sonu, Shanyo, Kalyana Mitra, and suddenly awaken to this void and quiescent awareness, that quiescent awareness becomes free of thoughts and formless. Who then would assume that there are any signs of a self or a person? Upon awakening to the fact that all signs are void, the mind naturally becomes free of thoughts. If we are aware of a thought at the moment it arises, by being aware of it, it will vanish. The sublime approach to practice lies only in this. Consequently, even though we cultivate all the manifold supplementary practices, they all have no thought, munyom, wunyen, as their source. If we can only maintain no thought, then liking and disliking will naturally fade away, and compassion and wisdom will naturally grow in brightness. Immoral actions will naturally be eliminated, and meritorious deeds will naturally be augmented. As for our understanding, we perceive that all signs are signless. As for our practice, this is called the cultivation that cultivates nothing. When the afflictions have finally dissipated, birth and death will cease. With the cessation of production and cessation, a quiescent radiance will manifest itself, and our responsiveness will be unlimited. This is called Buddhahood. The Northern School's basic premise. The basic premise of the Northern School is as follows. All sentient beings are inherently endowed with the nature of enlightenment in the same way that a mirror has the nature of reflectivity. But just like a mirror obscured by dust, the afflictions cover that nature so that it does not appear. If we rely on the words of the teachings and put to rest all deluded thoughts, then the nature of the mind will awaken as those thoughts dissipate, and there will be nothing of which it is unaware. It is like polishing a mirror. Once all the dust has been removed, the surface of the mirror will be bright and clean, and there will be nothing that it cannot reflect. Zongmi's critique. This school is simply characterized by its view that maculated and pure states are produced by conditions. Its approach is to go against the current of samsara and resist the proclivities of habit, vasana. But it does not recognize that deluded thoughts are originally non-existent, and the nature of the mind is originally pure. Since its awakening still lacks acumen, how can its cultivation be considered authentic? The Hongzhou School's basic premise. The basic premise of the Hongzhou School is as follows. The arising of mental states, the activity of thought, snapping the fingers, shifting the eyes, and indeed all actions and activities are in their totality the functioning of the Buddha nature. As there is no functioning that occurs apart from it, the totality of greed, hatred, or delusion, the performance of wholesome and unwholesome actions, and their corresponding consequences of pain or pleasure are all the Buddha nature. It is like preparing a wide variety of foodstuffs from flour. Each of them is just flour. To explain these implications further, the four great elements that comprise this body of bones and flesh, together with the throat, tongue, molars and incisors, the eyes, ears, hands, and feet, are absolutely incapable of talking, seeing, listening, or acting on their own. At the instant when life has ended and the body has not yet begun to decompose, the mouth cannot speak, the eyes cannot see, the ears cannot hear, the feet cannot walk, and the hands cannot act. Consequently, we know that what is capable of speech and activity perforce is the Buddha nature. Moreover, if we examine carefully each of these four great material elements that compose this body of bones and flesh, it is obvious that none of them knows how to be greedy, hateful, or deluded. Hence, the afflictions of greed and hatred are also the Buddha nature. The essence of the Buddha nature is free from all differentiations, but can produce the whole range of differentiations. That its essence is free of differentiations means that this Buddha nature is not profane or sacred, cause or effect, wholesome or unwholesome. It is neither form nor sign. It neither goes nor stays, and ultimately it is neither Buddha nor sentient being. It can produce this whole range of differentiations means that this nature is in fact the functioning of the essence. Consequently, it has the potentiality to be profane or sacred, cause or effect, wholesome or unwholesome. It manifests forms and manifests signs. It can become either a Buddha or a sentient being, and ultimately it even has the potentiality to become the afflictions of greed, hatred, delusion, and so forth. If we closely examine the nature of that essence, we will see that ultimately it is not something that can be perceived or experienced, in the same way that the eye cannot see itself, and so on. If we extend our examination to its responsiveness, we will realize that all action and activity is the Buddha nature. There is no other Dharma that can act as the realizer or the realized. This is the premise of the Lankavatara Sutra, which says, "The Tathagata Garbha, womb of the Buddhas, is the cause of both wholesome and unwholesome actions. It can produce all the 6 rebirth destinies and the 4 modes of birth, where the pain or pleasure that is received will be commensurate with the causes put in place." In another passage it states, "The Buddhas say that the mind is the origin." And finally, or there is a Buddha realm where raising the eyebrows, shifting the eyes, laughing, yawning, coughing, and all other actions are the activities of the Buddha. Since the principles understood through awakening are all impeccable and natural, the principles by which we cultivate should accord with them. We should not generate a state of mind that intends to eliminate evil and cultivate good, but neither should we generate a state of mind that seeks to cultivate the path. The path is the mind. You cannot use the mind to cultivate the mind. Evil, too, is the mind. You cannot use the mind to eliminate the mind. One who neither eliminates evil nor cultivates good, who is completely natural and autonomous in all situations, this is called a liberated person. There is no Dharma that can bind, no Buddha that can be produced. The mind is like space, which can be neither supplemented nor diminished. How can we presume to add to it? And why is this? There is not a single Dharma to be found that is external to the mind nature. Hence, cultivation means simply to give free rein to the mind. Zongmi's critique. The Hongzhou school and the preceding northern school are diametrically opposed to one another. The preceding northern school presumed that, from dawn to dusk, discriminative activities are all unreal. This school presumes that, from dawn to dusk, discriminative activities are all real. The Oxhead school's basic premise. The basic premise of the Oxhead, Udu, Nyuto school is as follows. All dharmas are like a dream. Fundamentally, nothing is of any concern. The mind and the sense spheres are originally quiescent. They have not become void just now. Deluded about this fact, we presume this world exists, and we experience such things as prosperity and decline, nobility and ignobility. Since such things may be agreeable or disagreeable, they arouse passions like love and hate. And once passions are aroused, we become entangled in all manner of suffering. But when this world is created in a dream and experienced in a dream, what gain or loss can there really be? The wisdom that can comprehend this is also the dreaming mind. And ultimately, even if there were a Dharma that surpassed nirvana, it too would be like a dream or a conjurer's trick. If we discern that originally nothing is of any concern, this principle should enable us to surrender ourselves and relinquish our passions. When passions are relinquished, we remove the causes of suffering, and we then transcend all suffering and distress. Hence, the practice of this school involves the relinquishment of passion. Zongmi's critique. The preceding Hongzhou school posits that the awareness that all thoughts are completely authentic is awakening, and giving free rein to mind is cultivation. This Oxhead school considers awakening to be the state of nothing being of any concern, and cultivation to be the relinquishment of passion. Zongmi's critique of the three deficient schools. As for the differences in the views and understanding of these three houses, the first regards everything as unreal, the Northern school. The second regards everything as authentic, the Hongzhou school. The last regards everything as non-existent, the Oxhead school. Now, considering their respective definitions of practice, the first defines it as subduing the mind and eliminating the unreal, the Northern school. The second defines it as having the faith to give free rein to the nature of the passions, the Hongzhou school. The last defines it as pacifying states of mind so that they do not arise, the Oxhead school. Now, for me, Zongmi, my nature is such that I like to corroborate things. After examining each of these schools, I have concluded that their basic premises are as set out above. But if I were to take these descriptions and ask their students about them, not one would accept them. If I asked in terms of existence, bhava, they would reply in terms of voidness, shunyata. If I argued for voidness, they would point to existence. Or else they might say that both alternatives are wrong, or that everything is ineffable, or that it does not matter whether you cultivate or not, or other such answers. They respond in this way because they are always afraid of being trapped by words and letters. And since they are perpetually afraid of languishing in their attainments, they dismiss any sort of verbal description. I would only give detailed instructions to teachers and students willing to take refuge in their own minds, so that they will be able to contemplate and reflect at all times and mature their practice and understanding. Chinul's exegesis of the four schools. Personal note by Chinul. In a later passage of the Dharma collection and special practice record, Zongmi says, "The Hongzhou school consistently advocates greed and hatred. Loving kindness and wholesome actions are all the Buddha nature. How could there be any difference between them? It is like someone who only notices that the wetness of water never changes, but does not realize the immense difference between the success of a boat that crosses over that water and the failure of a boat that capsizes in it. Consequently, although this school comes close to the approach of sudden awakening, it does not quite reach it, but as far as the approach of gradual cultivation is concerned, it is completely off the mark. Since the Oxhead school has already comprehended voidness, it halfway understands the approach of sudden awakening. Since it advocates the relinquishment of passion, it has no shortcomings in regard to the approach of gradual cultivation. Because the Northern school is nothing more than gradual cultivation and completely lacks any conception of sudden awakening, even its cultivation is incorrect. For the Hertze school, there first must be a sudden awakening, and one then cultivates while relying on that awakening. According to this passage, Hongzhou came close to the approach of sudden awakening, but did not quite reach it, whereas Oxhead half understood it. For this reason, Zongmi claims here that it is crucial that ordinary practitioners put their faith only in Hertze, not in the other schools. While this may be the case, if we examine the basic premises of the two schools of Hongzhou and Oxhead as they are recorded here, they can be deep and wide-ranging, extremely abstruse and arcane. They enable people who are cultivating their minds to see clearly for themselves into their own speech and activities. How could there be a more recondite objective than this? I am not yet completely certain whether Master Mi's intention was to deprecate the premises of these two schools or to praise them. Nevertheless, he restrained latter-day students clinging to verbal explanations and prompted them toward a consummate awakening to the knowledge and vision of the Tathagatas. Hence, he would not have intended either to deprecate or praise these two schools. How do we know this? In Zongmi's preface to Comprehensive Expressions of the Fount of Chan collection, Chanyuan, Chuquan, Ji, Du Shu, there is a review of these three schools. Briefly, he states, the first tradition of Chan is the school that dissipates the spurious in order to cultivate the mind, Singmeng Susim Chong, Shiwang Shushin Zong, the Northern school. Second is the school that teaches total annihilation without a support, Minjul Mugi Zhong, Minjue Wuji Zong, the Oxhead school. It explains that profane and sacred dharmas are like a dream or a conjurer's trick. All those who have but cursorily examined this Soen principle might claim that these words are the ultimate, but they are not aware that this school does not just consider such words alone to be the Dharma. Judging from this statement, how could Master Mi not have been aware that the path of the Oxhead school was comprehensive and all-inclusive? When he said that Ox had only half understood, it was because he wanted those who recognized only the principle of void quiescence as being the ultimate to know that the mind of numinous awareness, the original functioning of the self-nature, will then lead to an all-encompassing understanding. Third is the school that directly reveals the mind-nature, Chikyun Simsung Chong, Shixian Xinxing Zong, the Hongzhou and Hetze schools. It teaches that all dharmas, whether existent or void, are just the true nature. The revelation of the mind nature is of two types. The first, the Hongzhou school, explains, that which now enables you to speak and act, to experience greed and hatred, loving kindness and forbearance, and so forth, is precisely your Buddha nature. If at all times and in all places you merely put karma to rest, nurture the spirit, and mature the embryo of sanctity, then this will manifest the natural divine marvel. This is in fact authentic awakening, authentic cultivation, and authentic realization. The second, viz. The Hetze school, says, all dharmas are like a dream. This is what all the saints have taught. Consequently, deluded thoughts are originally quiescent, and the sense spheres are originally void. This void and quiescent mind, its numinous awareness, is never dark. That is your true nature. Even so, since these two houses both aim to amalgamate all signs and return to the nature, they are consequently the same tradition. Even though the preceding three schools may have many differences, each is involved in practicing the twofold benefit of self and others and employing appropriate expedients. None of them is in error. The principle on which these traditions are founded does not involve any duality. For this reason, we should know that Master Mi was not unaware that Matsu's explanations of Dharma in the Hongzhou school directly revealed the mind nature and were deeply imbued with skillful expedients for practicing the twofold benefit. When he said that although this school comes close to the approach of sudden awakening, it does not quite reach it, he only meant that he was afraid students would accept only the verbal description and languish in the mind's adaptive functioning and thus never quite achieve an awakening to its quiescent awareness. For this reason, people who are cultivating the mind in this degenerate age of the Dharma should first critically examine the nature and characteristics, essence and functioning of their own minds according to the teachings presented by Hetze. They should not become trapped in void quiescence or languish in adaptability. After they have experienced an authentic understanding, they should review the basic premises of the two schools of Hongzhou and Ox Head. If it turns out that they complement each other, how could people erroneously presume that they should be either accepted or rejected? Therefore, it is said in Zongmi's preface, if any of the three dots constituting the Siddham letter I are out of place, the letter I cannot be constructed. If the three schools are in divergence, how could they possibly enable anyone to achieve Buddhahood? This is what I mean here. Previously, it was said that, as far as the approach of gradual cultivation is concerned, Hongzhou is completely off the mark. But it was later said that Hongzhou engaged in authentic cultivation and authentic realization. It would seem that these statements are contradictory. The Hongzhou school may be completely off the mark from its perspective that there is nothing that needs to be cultivated or counteracted because the principles understood through awakening are impeccable and entirely natural. But it may be called authentic cultivation from the standpoint that it nurtures the spirit in all situations and manifests divinely sublime practices. Consequently, both interpretations have their rationale and are not mutually contradictory. You who are cultivating the mind do not rise to thoughts of doubt. You should know that the primary purpose in looking into a mirror is to appraise the beauty or ugliness of one's own face. How can you languish in the writings of others, spending your day in idle controversy, and not examine your own mind or cultivate right contemplation? The ancients said, the value of the Buddha Dharma lies in putting it into practice, not in endless rhetoric. Keep this in mind. Keep this in mind. The approaches of Dharma and person. Zongmi's record continues. Above, I have recounted each individual school. Now I will assess their profundity and shallowness, strengths and shortcomings. The mind links together the myriads of dharmas. The tastes of its attributes are boundless. All the Kyo teachings are elaborations and amplifications of doctrinal principles. The Soen school is instead their condensation and abridgment. In regard to dharmas, this abridgment has reduced them to the two attributes of immutability, pulbyan, bubyan, nirvikara, and adaptability, suyun, swiyuan, yata pratyaya. In regard to persons, it has divided them into the two approaches of sudden awakening, dono, donwu, and gradual cultivation, jomsu, jianshu.
When these two attributes are clarified, we will know the seminal points of all the sutras and shastras in the entire canon. When the two approaches are initiated, we can see the tracks of all the sages and saints. It is here that we will find the meaning of Bodhidharma's profound intent. The relationship between immutability and adaptability, the simile of the jewel. First, I will discuss the immutability and adaptability of dharmas. However, since abstract principles are difficult to comprehend when expounded directly, I now will use similes as a means of comparison, literally scale and mirror, hyonggyong, hengjing, in order to specify the strengths and shortcomings of each school and to assess whether their basic premises concerning one's own mind are authentic or inauthentic. On your first perusal, simply read through the similes in their entirety. Once you have understood their primary and secondary points, then consult the annotation to assess their principles in detail. The mind is like a money jewel that is perfectly round, pure, and lustrous, and untarnished by any shade of color. The monistic, numinous mind nature is void, quiescent, and ever aware. It is originally free from any differentiations and any notion of wholesome or unwholesome. As its substance is lustrous, when it comes into contact with external objects, it can reflect all the different shades of color. Because the mind's essence remains always aware, when faced with any conditioned situation, it can differentiate the various shades of right and wrong, liking and disliking. It can even produce or create all the various manners of mundane and supramundane phenomena. This is the attribute of adaptability. These shades of color may have individual differences, but the lustrous jewel is never altered. Foolish and wise, wholesome and unwholesome, are each distinct. Sorrow and happiness, hatred and love, arise and cease of themselves. But the mind that is capable of awareness is never interrupted. This is the attribute of immutability. Although there are hundreds and thousands of different shades that the jewel may reflect, let us consider the color black, which is diametrically opposed to the innate brilliance of the lustrous jewel. This will serve to illustrate the fact that, although the numinous and bright knowledge and vision is the exact opposite of the darkness of ignorance, they are nevertheless of the same single essence. The Dharma and the simile are now complete. This means that, when the jewel reflects the color black, its entire substance becomes completely black, and it is no longer lustrous. If ignorant children or country bumpkins then happen to see it, they will immediately presume it is a black jewel. When the mind of numinous awareness is present in an ordinary person, it is completely foolish, deluded, greedy, and lustful. Hence, a deluded person simply assumes that he is obviously an ordinary person. The preceding is a simile for all the sentient beings in the 6 rebirth destinies. If someone were to tell them, i.e., the naive and ignorant, this is a lustrous jewel, you can be sure they would brazenly distrust him. They might even get angry at him or accuse him of trying to deceive them. And even if he were to explain all his reasons, they would never listen to or take them seriously. I, Zongmi, have frequently encountered this type of person. If you tell them, that which right now is clear and capable of awareness is your Buddha mind, they brazenly disbelieve you. They are unwilling even to consider this prospect, but instead simply say, I, so-and-so, am ungifted, literally, of dull faculties, Tongun, Dungen, Mridvindiya, and really cannot comprehend this. This is the usual perspective among people who cling to characteristics in the Dharma characteristics schools, viz., Yogacara and Abhidharma, of the greater and lesser vehicles, and in the teaching of humans and divinities, i.e., the moral teaching on karmic retribution. Chinul's personal note: not being cowardly or timid in regard to this matter, having firm faith in their own minds, relying on the practice of tracing back the light of the mind, Ho Guang, and appreciating for themselves the taste of the Dharma. This is the understanding awakening achieved by people who cultivate their minds. Those who make no serious effort to trace back the mind's radiance, Panjo, but simply nod their heads and say, that which right now is clear and capable of awareness is your Buddha mind, such people have certainly not grasped the idea. The Northern School's view. Even though they might want to believe your explanation that this is a lustrous jewel, their eyes see that it is black, and they say the jewel is shrouded and obscured by the black color. Only after it has been cleaned and polished and the blackness removed will it show its luster. Only then will they say that they see for themselves the lustrous jewel. The view of the Northern School is like this. Personal note: I hope that those who are cultivating the mind will examine this simile in detail so that they will not succumb to such a view. You do not have to leave behind the spurious in order to search for what is authentic. You also should not presume that the spurious is the authentic. Rather, if you understand that deluded thoughts originate from the nature, then their origination is in fact their non-origination, and at that point they are quiescent. How could there then persist this view of a dichotomy between the authentic and the spurious? The Hongzhou school's view. Furthermore, there is another type of person who points out, in fact, the blackness is the lustrous jewel. The substance of that lustrous jewel itself can never be seen. So if you want to know what its substance is, it is in fact that blackness, or various different shades of blue or yellow. Such a position prompts fools who have firm faith in these words either to focus just on that shade of black, or to recognize all the different shades as being the lustrous jewel. At other times, if they should see a black soapberry or blue beads made of rice gum, or even beads of dark amber or creamy quartz, they would say, "These are money jewels." On a different occasion, if they see a genuine money jewel, when it is not reflecting any color and only its lustrous, clear luminosity is visible, they fail to recognize it because they do not see any of the colors that can be apprehended. For this reason, they have doubts about the jewel's lustrous luminosity. The view of the Hongzhou school is like this. Fools refers to descendant students of this school. At other times, if they should see a black soapberry, refers to the thoughts of greed, craving, hatred, and conceit that appear in the mind when it is immersed in the mundane world and discriminates the objects in the coarse sense spheres. Dark amber and creamy quartz refers to thoughts of loving kindness, virtue, humility, and reverence. When it is not reflecting any color, refers to the mental state that is free from all thoughts. Only its lustrous, clear luminosity is visible refers to no thought, which is thoroughly aware in and of itself. They have doubts means such people saying that their presumption is that they will only accept what they can apprehend. Personal note: if people who are cultivating the mind comprehend that the nature of both the wholesome and unwholesome is void and utterly unascertainable, then, even though they may be acting all day long, they constantly maintain a state of no mind, mu sim, wu xin, for themselves, and do not succumb to the view of these fools. On the other hand, when the no-thought that is thoroughly aware in and of itself is not in contact with external conditions, should people give rise to any further intellectualization, the net of views will become even more tightly meshed. The Oxhead school's view. There is another type of person who, hearing the explanation that these different colors are all illusory and utterly void to their very core, presumes that the jewel itself is also utterly void. He then says, "Cling to nothing, and you will be an accomplished person. Acknowledge that even one Dharma exists, and you still will not understand." Such a person has not awakened to the fact that at the very point where all shades of color are void, there still exists the brilliant luster of the jewel, which is not void. The view of the Oxhead school is like this. When its adherents hear voidness described in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, they assume that the original enlightened nature is also void and unascertainable. Hence, it is clarified here that the mind's voidness refers to the absence in the true mind of discriminative thoughts like greed, hatred, and so forth. It does not mean that there is no mind. No mind means only that we eliminate the afflictions in the mind. Consequently, we know that Oxhead only eliminates what is not. It is not yet revealed what is. Personal note: although this sort of account is offered so that people who are cultivating the mind will not succumb to empty oblivion, what fault is there if, in order to cure the mental blindness of those who still tend to cling to verbal explanations, it is explained that the nature of original enlightenment is also unascertainable? A simile illustrating Hetze's view follows. The Hetze school's view. Why can it not be stated straight out that just its brilliant, clear, and perfect luster is the substance of the jewel? The mind essence is just void and quiescent awareness. If we only explain void quiescence without revealing that awareness, then how would it differ from empty space? It would be like a brilliant and clear sphere of porcelain, which may be clear but lacks luminosity. How can that be called a money jewel? How would it be able to reflect anything? All the reflected colors, black, as well as all the shades of blue, yellow, and so forth, are illusory. Hence, at the very moment when black is seen, that black is not inherently black. It is that jewel's reflected luster. blue is not inherently blue. It is just that same luster. Red, white, yellow, and so forth are exactly the same. They are all just its luster. Therefore, if you regard each and every shade as being simply that brilliant, clear, and perfect luster, you will not be confused about the jewel. Everything is void. The mind alone is immutable. Even when the mind is deluded, it is still aware, for awareness is inherently undiluted. Even when thoughts arise, it is still aware, for awareness is inherently free of thoughts. For that matter, whether the mind is sad or happy, joyful or angry, loving or hateful, in each of these cases it is always aware. Awareness is inherently void and quiescent. To be aware while remaining void and quiescent is the point at which one is clear and unconfused about the mind nature. This preceding description is significantly different from all the other schools. If you simply are unconfused about the real nature of the jewel, then black is not black. That blackness is in fact the jewel. It will be the same with all other colors. At that point it no longer matters whether colors are present or not, for the jewel's luster and the blackness are completely interfused. What further obstruction could there be between them? Black is not black is the same as oxhead. Blackness is in fact the jewel, is the same as Hongzhou. If one has seen for oneself that lustrous jewel, viz. The Heze approach, the profound will perforce subsume the shallow. Summation of the jewel simile. If you do not recognize that the jewel's essence, which is able to reflect all colors, is eternally unchanging, the Heze school's view, but insist instead that black and so forth are the jewel, Hongzhou's view, or that one must try to remove the black in order to recover the jewel, the Northern school's view, or that luminosity and blackness are both non-existent, Oxhead's view, then in these cases you have not yet seen the jewel. Personal note. Previously, in Chinul's Preface, Excerpts, Chapter 1, it was said that Heze's awakening and understanding were lofty and brilliant, and his discernment clear. This is exactly what is meant here. The relevance of numinous awareness. Question. The explanations of the ideal nature given throughout the Mahayana Sutras, in the teachings of every past and present school of Soen, and even in the Heze school, all say the same thing. The ideal nature is unproduced and unextinguished, unconditioned and signless, neither profane nor sacred, neither right nor wrong, ineffable and unascertainable. It is enough now just to rely on this perspective. What need is there to bring up the idea of numinous awareness? Answer. These are all examples of apophatic discourse. They are not yet capable of exposing the essence of the mind. If we do not point out that the clear, constant awareness that is present now, never interrupted and never dark, is your own mind, then what do we speak of as being unconditioned, asamskrita, signless, alakshana, and so forth? For this reason you must understand that all the various teachings simply explain that it is this awareness that is unproduced, anutpada, anutpana, and unextinguished, aniruddha, anirodha, and so forth. Consequently, Heze pointed out the knowledge and vision present within that void and signless state so that people would acknowledge it and comprehend that their own minds pass from one lifetime to another, generation after generation, interminably, until eventually they achieve Buddhahood. Furthermore, Heze was able to refer to various terms like unconditioned, unabiding, even ineffable, and so forth, by simply referring to them all as the void and quiescent awareness in which everything is subsumed. Voidness, shunyata, means that it is devoid of all signs. It is still an apophatic term. Quiescence, shanti, is the immutable attribute of the real nature. It is not the same as empty nothingness. Awareness refers to the attribute that exposes the thing itself. It is not the same as conceptual discrimination, vikalpa. Only this, then, is the innate essence of the true mind. Therefore, from the initial arousal of the aspiration for enlightenment, bodhicitta, up through the attainment of Buddhahood, there is only quiescence, and only awareness, immutable and uninterrupted. It is only according to the respective stage along the bodhisattva path that the designations and attributes of quiescence and awareness are slightly different. The remainder of this passage has already been quoted in the Society Compact, so I do not record it here. How Hongzhou and Heze differ. Question. Hongzhou also referred to numinous attention, gleaming reflection, kamjo, jianjiao, and so on. How are these any different from awareness? Answer. If we were to reveal the one essence through its many different attributes, then, since the myriads of dharmas are all this one mind, how could we be limited solely to such terms as attention, reflection, and so on? But if we were to point directly to that very essence itself, then the mind nature of the foolish and the wise, the wholesome and the unwholesome, even that of the birds and beasts would, in all these cases, be naturally clear and constantly aware, and accordingly different from the insentience of trees and rocks. Such terms as attention and awareness are not all-inclusive. For instance, if we say that a person is deluded, it means that he is unenlightened. If we say that a person is foolish, it means that he lacks wisdom. When the mind is blank, it cannot be called gleaming, reflective, and the like. Hence, how can these states be identical to the mind nature that is constantly aware by its very nature? For this reason, the chief of the Huaom commentators said in his epistle on the essentials of the mind, Xinyao Jian, the essence of the unabiding mind is the numinous awareness that is never dark. Although Hongzhou referred to numinous attention, it was just to indicate that sentient beings have this quality. It is like inferring they all have the Buddha nature, but without directly pointing it out. For them, pointing it out means simply to infer that it is that which is capable of speech and so forth.
But if they try to ascertain exactly what mind nature, Buddha nature, and so forth are, all they will be able to say is that these are all provisional names, not conclusive dharmas. To sum up, the teachings involve the two approaches of apophasis, the school that teaches absolute annihilation, and cataphasis, the school of direct revelation. And if we try to ascertain their real import, they refer respectively to true voidness, Qingong, Zhenkong, and sublime existence, Miaoyu, Miaoyu. If we probe the original mind, we find that it subsumes both essence and function. Now, the Hongzhou and Oxhead schools presume that wiping all traces away is the be-all and end-all, Qiguk, Qi. This involves only the apophatic teachings and the attribute of true voidness. Although they may master essence, they overlook function, for their approach is deficient regarding the cataphatic teachings and the attribute of sublime existence. The Hongzhou school only infers the reality of the Buddha nature. Question. Since Hongzhou revealed the mind nature through its capacities for speech, action, and so forth, it corresponds to the revelation teaching. As these capacities are identical to the functioning of the mind nature, what deficiency is there here? Answer. The original essence of the true mind contains two types of function, yong. First, there is the innate function of the self-nature, chasong ponyong, zixing benyong. Second, there is the adaptive function that accords with conditions, suyun ungyong, suiyuan yingyong. These can be compared to a bronze mirror. The bronze material corresponds to the essence of the self-nature. The reflectivity of the bronze corresponds to the function of the self-nature. The images reflected thereby are the adaptive function that accords with conditions. Under suitable conditions, images can be reflected and will be displayed in thousands of different ways. But the reflectivity itself is ever bright. That this reflectivity has but a single flavor, ilmi, yimi, serves as a simile for the constant quiescence of the mind. This is the essence of the self-nature. The mind's constant awareness is the function of the self-nature. The capacity of this awareness for speech, discrimination, and so on is the function that adapts to conditions. Now, in pointing to this capacity for speech and the like, Hongzhou is only highlighting the function that adapts to conditions, overlooking the function of the self-nature. Furthermore, the revelation teaching also involves the two approaches of revelation through inference, piryang, bilyang, anumana, and revelation through direct perception, hyolyang, xianliang, pratyaksha. Hongzhou notes that the mind itself cannot be pointed to. It is through its capacity for speech and so forth that we can verify its existence and become aware of the presence of the Buddha nature. This is revelation through inference. Hetze straightaway says that since the mind's essence is the capacity for awareness, that awareness is in fact the mind. To reveal the mind in terms of this awareness is revelation through direct perception. My narration of the two attributes of immutability and adaptability is completed as above. Chinul's exegesis of school controversies. Personal note: Premier Pei, Xu,
791 to 864, writes in a letter addressed to Soen Master Mi, adherents of the Soen lineages all diverge from one another. They criticize and slander each other and are unwilling to come to any kind of accord. The Master Song Mi also said, "Fools" refers to descendant students of this school. Excerpts Chapter 2, the Hongzhou School's View, Supra. Now, it is clear that all those who discriminate between the virtues and shortcomings of the different schools are adherents who have wrongly inherited the Sun School's directives and lost its true meaning. Hong Juefan Hui Hong, in his Forest Records, Lin Jian Lu, sharply rejects this master's, Zong Mi's, judgments and supports the premises of Hongzhou and Oxhead. This is because he fears that the shortcomings discussed by this master, Zong Mi, which seem to implicate the founders of these traditions, might confuse the minds of their descendant students. When teaching people of different capacities, each past teacher used his own particular set of skillful expedients. Hence we cannot mistakenly hold views favoring this or that approach based solely on their words. Instead, we should use this gleaming mirror to illuminate our own minds. Discerning what is spurious and what authentic, let us cultivate samadhi and prajna simultaneously and quickly realize bodhi. Sudden awakening and gradual cultivation. Next, I will elucidate the two approaches of sudden awakening and gradual cultivation. The principle of true suchness does not involve either Buddhas or sentient beings, let alone a transmission from master to disciple. Nevertheless, since there has been a patriarchal succession starting from the Buddha onward, we can be certain that from the standpoint of the person, there are still preserved approaches that involve cultivation, realization, approach, and access. If this approach is discussed in regard to the person, there then are still distinctions between delusion and awakening, ordinary person and saint. Awakening from delusion is sudden. Transforming an ordinary person into a saint is gradual. Sudden awakening. What is sudden awakening? Due to beginningless delusion and corrupted thinking, cf. Viparyasa, you presume that the four great material elements, Mahabhuta, are the body, deluded thinking is the mind, and these together are the self. But if you come across a spiritual mentor who explains as above the import of these concepts of immutability and adaptability, nature and characteristics, and essence and function, you can abruptly awaken to the fact that the numinous, bright knowledge and vision are your own true mind. That mind is originally ever quiescent and devoid of nature or characteristics. It is, in fact, the Dharmakaya. This non-duality of body and mind is the true self, which has not the slightest difference with that of all the Buddhas. Consequently, it is called sudden. An analogy for sudden awakening. Suppose a high courtier dreams he is in prison, his body locked in a kang, suffering all kinds of anxiety and pain, and thinking of 100 different ways to escape. Suppose that someone then happens to call out and wake him up. Suddenly awakened, he would then see that his body had always been in his home, and that in his ease and happiness, wealth and rank, he is no different from any of the other magistrates at the imperial court. The high courtier is a metaphor for the Buddha nature, the dream for delusion, and the prison for the three realms of existence. Tridhatuka. The body represents the alaya consciousness, alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness, and the kang stands for greed and attachment. Suffering all kinds of anxiety and pain refers to karmic retribution. 100 different ways to escape corresponds to inquiring about the Dharma and eagerness in cultivation. Someone then happens to call out and wake him up refers to spiritual mentors. Suddenly awakened corresponds to the opening of the mind upon hearing the Dharma. He would then see that his body refers to the true self, the Dharmakaya. Had always been in his home refers to the Vimalakirti Nirdesha scriptures statement, the ultimate void and quiescent house. In his ease and happiness refers to the happiness of nirvana. Wealth and rank means that the essence is originally endowed with meritorious qualities and sublime functions as numerous as the sands of the Ganges. Ganganadivaluka. No different from any of the other magistrates at the imperial court means that he has the same true nature as all the Buddhas. Since each correspondence in this Dharma analogy is clear, you can easily ascertain that although the original source of the body and mind during dreams and during the waking state is identical, when it comes to discussing their characteristics and functions, there is a drastic difference between what is distorted and what is correct. Once the man in the analogy has awakened, he will never willingly return to being the courtier in the dream. Hence the analogy shows that although the source of the mind is one, delusion and awakening are drastically different.
Thus, to be a grand minister in a dream, to gain through one's practice rebirth in such high states as the divinity Mahabrahma and so forth while remaining deluded, is not as good as to become a superintendent of employees in the waking state, the initial access to the first level of the 10 stages of faith after having awakened. To possess the 7 jewels, Sapta Ratna, in a dream, to cultivate the innumerable meritorious actions while remaining deluded, is not as good as having 100 coins in the waking state to keep the 5 precepts, Panchashila, and to develop the 10 wholesome ways of action, Dasha Kushala Karma Pata, after having awakened. In all these cases, one is spurious and the other authentic. Consequently, they cannot be compared. This is what is meant in the sutra teachings when it is said that to make offerings with all the 7 jewels in the Trikiliakosm is not as good as listening to one line of a gatha of this Prajna Paramita Sutra. Now, since there is an ongoing transmission from master to disciple, we must distinguish clearly between what is distorted and what is correct. Chinul's exegesis of sudden awakening. Personal note: I hope that all who are seeking the path will evaluate this approach of sudden awakening from every perspective. Since the Dharma analogy is clear, confirm it for yourself any time. If you have had no point of awakening or understanding, how can you say that your cultivation is authentic? I have noticed that students of Kyo succumb to explanations appearing in the provisional teachings, Nayarta, and clinging to the differentiation between the authentic and the spurious, they make themselves backslide. Others chat with their mouths about the unimpeded interpenetration between phenomenon and phenomena, sasamue, shishi wuai, but do not cultivate contemplative practice, because they do not believe that there are esoteric akroamata for gaining access to awakening to their own minds. Even though they hear about seeing the nature and achieving Buddhahood in Soen, they think this means nothing more than the principle of ineffableness as described in the Kyo interpretation of the sudden teaching. Nor are they aware of the full implications of the account that in an all-encompassing awakening to the original mind, immutability and adaptability, nature and characteristics, essence and function, ease and happiness, and wealth and rank are the same as that of all the Buddhas. How can such people be considered wise? I've also noticed that some students of Soen believe that only people of exceptional capacities can directly ascend to the stage of Buddhahood without having to progress through all the steps. They do not believe in the text of this record, which teaches that after achieving awakened understanding, one accesses the 10 levels of faith, the preliminary stage of the path. Consequently, even if they develop their own minds to some extent, they are unaware of the depth and shallowness of understanding and practice, or of the production and cessation of tainted proclivities of habit. They are full of conceit regarding the Dharma, and the words they utter exaggerate their level of achievement. Li Tongxuan's exposition of the Avatamsaka Sutra, Huayan Jing Lun, states, when in the cause that is faith, an ordinary person of great aspiration meshes without the slightest degree of error with all the qualities of the fruition of Buddhahood, faith will then be achieved. If we are aware of this tenet, we will, without being self-denigrating or haughty, know the meaning of cultivating the mind. The explanation of gradual cultivation that follows refers to gradualness from the perspective of the consummate teachings. Reflect on it carefully. Gradual cultivation. Next, I will elucidate gradual cultivation. Even though you may suddenly awaken to the fact that the true mind, the Dharmakaya, is entirely the same in all the Buddhas, for a multitude of kalpas you have mistakenly grasped at the 4 great elements as being the self. Since your proclivities of habit have become second nature, it is extremely difficult to abandon them suddenly. For this reason, while continuing to rely on your awakening, you must cultivate gradually. If you reduce the afflictions and reduce them again until you have nothing left to reduce, you could be said to have achieved Buddhahood. Outside this mind, there is no Buddhahood that can be achieved. Nevertheless, even though you must cultivate gradually, you have previously awakened to the fact that the afflictions are originally void, and the nature of the mind is originally pure. While eradicating the unwholesome, therefore, you eradicate without eradicating anything. While cultivating the wholesome, you cultivate without cultivating anything. This is authentic cultivation and eradication. An analogy for gradual cultivation. Question: as to this cultivation that is undertaken after awakening, relating it to the previous analogy of the dream, would it not be the same as if, after the courtier has awakened, he were still to try to escape from prison and free himself from the Kang? Answer: that was only an analogy concerning the aspect of sudden awakening, not an analogy for the aspect of gradual cultivation. Indeed, the Dharma has an infinity of meanings, but mundane matters have just one.
Therefore, although the Nirvana Sutra discusses only the Buddha nature, it presents 800 similes, each with its own application. They cannot be applied at random. Here is an analogy to explain gradual cultivation. Suppose an expanse of water is disturbed by the wind and heaves with wave after wave. One is then in danger of floating away or drowning. Or suppose the cold air freezes it into a sheet of ice. Its capacity for irrigating or washing is then blocked. Nevertheless, the wetness of water remains unchanged whether turbulent or placid, frozen or flowing.
Water is a metaphor for the true mind. Wind stands for ignorance, and waves stand for the afflictions. Floating away or drowning stands for wandering between the 6 rebirth destinies. Cold air refers to the proclivities toward ignorance, craving, and sensuality. Freezes it into a sheet of ice stands for tenaciously clinging to the 4 great material elements until their paired personal and impersonal forms are obstructed. Its capacity for irrigating or washing is then blocked. Irrigating is a metaphor for the expression, "It rains a great rain of Dharma," which benefits all living things and nourishes the sprouts of the path. Washing refers to removing the afflictions, and as all this is impossible so long as delusion remains, it is blocked. Nevertheless, the wetness of water remains unchanged, whether turbulent or placid, frozen or flowing, means that when you are greedy or angry, you are aware. When you are loving and altruistic, you are also aware. Whatever your emotional state, sorrow or joy, grief or happiness, you are never unaware. Hence I said unchanged. Now, the sudden awakening to the constant awareness of the original mind is like cognizing the immutable wetness of water. Since the mind is then no longer deluded, there is no ignorance. It is as if the wind had suddenly stopped. After awakening, mental disturbances naturally come to a gradual halt, like waves that gradually subside. By suffusing both body and mind with shila, morality, samadhi, and prajna, you gradually become self-reliant until you are unhindered even in displaying magic and miracles and can universally benefit all sentient beings. This is called Buddhahood.